Okay. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Okay, this works. So, fast forward to today's Zaqar. Who of you know what Zaqar is? A couple of hands. Okay. Enough hands to be happy. Cool. So if you know what Zaqar is, you probably know what Marconi was, and you probably have heard a lot of the rants in the community for the last 2.5 years, or probably 3 already. Before I start with my talk, few disclaimers. I literally just finished this talk, so I really don't have few ideas of what I'm going to say, but we're going to go through what Zaqar is today and what features we've implemented, since we renamed the project to an even worse name. And I normally speak very fast. That's normally. I'm originally from South America, so that's what we do there, unless you want to get killed. And I normally say bad words as well, but I'm not going to rant a lot today because I'm talking about my project, well, the project I work on most of the time. So definitely not planning to rant that much. That's me. My name is Flavio. I work on OpenStack full-time, and I still work at Red Hat. Not planning to go anywhere for now. And thanks all for being here. I have a couple of reasons why you might be here right now. That's my Twitter handle, and that's my email address. If you want to rant about Zaqar, that's probably where you want to go. Or you want to join the OpenStack IRC channel, Zaqar IRC channel. So if you're here, you're probably just chilling, or you're having one of those weird days that Monty mentioned. Or you just want to heckle about Zaqar and just waiting for the question session to rant about it, and I'll make sure that you don't have time for that. And almost. And if you know Zaqar and you're just happy with the project, then you're here just to hear what's new on the project. But either way, I'm happy you're here. And if you're here to heckle about Zaqar, there's a cat here. They say that it makes people happier and nicer. Unless I hate cats anyway, but I just put it there because that's what people say. I hope that helps. So now, on topic, Zaqar for the cloud. And by cloud, I mean OpenStack, honestly. I don't mean the entire world. I don't mean that you will just use it for whatever cloud you want. Hopefully, you will be able to do that at some point someday. But that's not the current plan. We're focusing a lot on OpenStack and making it a good service for OpenStack. By OpenStack, I mean users of OpenStack or even OpenStack itself within the cloud. And we'll see some of the use cases in a bit. That's the mission statement. Most of the mission statements lie a lot. This one seems pretty accurate. It wasn't accurate before, and we're going to go through some of the things that weren't accurate. I'm not going to read the mission statement for you, but I do have a TLDR for you of what Zaqar is. And Zaqar is a multi-tenant messaging service. It's being built by OpenStack and for OpenStack, and we're still trying to make it better for OpenStack. What else do I have to say about Zaqar? It has notifications built in. So if you know SQS, Simple Queue Services service from AWS, you know that there's also SNS, which is Simple Notification Service. You can think about Zaqar as those two services put together in a single service so that you will get all the benefits from having a messaging service. And like I'm saying, messaging service is a huge difference between having a queue service and a messaging service, and Zaqar is a messaging service. So that's one of the differences between Zaqar and SQS. And the second difference, and the main difference, is that it has notifications built in. Like we want to build this engine, this feature that would allow you to push those messages somewhere else and not just have them in the service. It has message delivery guarantees, and is horizontally scalable. And there's 2 stars there. And if you can't read these little tiny lines here, I'll read them for you. Most of these guarantees depend on the deployment, what storage engine you are using for Zaqar, and how you deploy it. So consult your favorite ops person to make sure these guarantees exist. And if that's not what you thought Zaqar was, if you thought it was a replacement for RabbitMQ, I'm sorry to tell you it is not. If you thought it was a queue service, I'm sorry to tell you it is not. It's a messaging service. And if you thought it was a replacement for IMAP, it is not a replacement for IMAP. I'm sorry, Monty. And if you thought it was an email service, it is not an email service because it is not even a replacement for IMAP. It is a messaging service, and the thing it wants to do is messaging. So, use cases. I'm almost at the end of my talk, and I feel like 10 minutes through. Just kidding. So, some use cases. Sometimes when I'm talking about Zaqar to people, there's a lot of confusion about what Zaqar is actually doing, what it aims to do, and there are well-known messaging services out there, queuing services. Like there's RabbitMQ, there's Qubit that it doesn't work as well, but anyway, this is being recorded. It's different. Yeah. There are other messaging services, I don't know, ZeroMQ, which is brokerless, and it has a whole lot of features in it that are really amazing and exciting. But again, like messaging is probably one of the fields in our industry that has been explored in so many different ways and broken in so many different other ways. So one of the ways that I like to explain Zaqar is just by presenting some of the use cases we're trying to cover. And as I said, it's being built for the cloud, and in its case, cloud means OpenStack. So one of the issues, one of the use cases is just messaging. I mean, nowadays, when you have a cloud, when you're deploying your cloud application, when you're deploying your application in the cloud, you most likely want it to be distributed, and you want to have a way to communicate between your different nodes and have an easy way to do that without having to install RabbitMQ, maintain and scale it, which is really hard, and most of the times it doesn't work anyway. So one of the goals here is to just provide you a way to just have messaging, right? You just tell your cloud provider, hey, I need to send messages between these two nodes or between these two peers, whether they are in the same cloud or outside the cloud. And you want your cloud provider to just tell you, you know what, there's this service, you just sign up for it, it's multi-tenant, your messages will be yours forever, it is durable, you're not gonna lose anything. There's your URL, just log into it and send messages from one point to another. And that's one of the things that Zaqar wants to do. Zaqar wants to provide a way to send messages throughout the cloud between your applications. You may argue and say, well, you know, there's this new cool service called Q, and it just, you know, provisions message brokers for you so you don't have to do it yourself. And it's true. I mean, if your cloud provider gives you Q and gives you the possibility to just deploy message brokers by clicking a button, that's perfectly fine. If that's something that your cloud provider is willing to maintain for you, that's perfectly fine. It's a good replacement for Zaqar, honestly. But if there's not, Zaqar is definitely one of the things that you want to have in there to be able to communicate between your cloud. The big difference here is that Q will deploy something that has some protocol that you have to learn, you have to adopt yourself. And since one of the things we want in OpenStack, and one of the things we've been working hard to maintain, and it's one of the things that Monty always rants about, is interoperability between clouds. This is something that Zaqar has kept as part of, you know, the whole design process. It's being interoperable between clouds, you know, having always the same API, not having a way to enable some endpoints based on your configuration or whatever. So the problem with Q here is that if your cloud provider gives you Q, but it doesn't, you know, like the underlying message broker that is being deployed has some random different protocol that you will have to learn, and it's not MQP, for instance. That might turn out being an issue and make your application not interoperable between different clouds. But that's just a corner case that you might want to keep in mind. Another use case is having inter-cloud communications, and we have several services in OpenStack that depend on guest agents being deployed on the virtual machines that you run. And some examples of that are Sahara, Trove, and there's some others. Like, for instance, Heat as well have some agents running. And one of the problems that all these services have in common is that these guest agents need to communicate with the undercloud, and they need to send messages to the service controllers. And they need to have a way to tell the controllers, hey, I'm up, I'm ready, or send me some messages, or send me some information in order for me to be able to keep going. In the case of Trove, it's managing databases, just reboot the database, do this and do that. They all have solved these issues in a different way. In the case of Trove, they insist that you should have a different RabbitMQ running, which is completely isolated from the other RabbitMQ you might be using for the rest of your cloud, which is totally fine, except that RabbitMQ is hard to maintain, it has some extra costs, and blah, 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 blah. And the other thing is that RabbitMQ doesn't have any multi-tenancy built in, which is something that Zaqar definitely provides, and that's something you want to have in your guest agent if you're running a multi-tenant cloud. Whereas Sahara has fixed this by just running SSH into the machine and uploading some files and having some communications going through SSH. which is very scary, honestly, because if you think about your virtual machine and your guest agents, normally those are accessible by external users, which means you are exposing some of the information of your cloud to external users that might get into the virtual machine. It really depends on the service, honestly. Not all the services allow you to SSH into a guest anyway. In the case of Zaqar, most of the time you need just a username and tenant, obviously, and a password to log into to the service and send messages. But for the cases where you don't want to provide those, Zaqar has a pre-assigned URL feature that we just developed, and it landed like 3 weeks ago, honestly. So it's not been released yet. But it has been, like, we developed that feature just for this use case, or mainly for this use case, because you don't want to give to your guest agents a username and a password that users might read and use elsewhere. You just want to give it a URL that you can just revoke easily, and that will give the user enough accesses and enough permissions to just post messages or just consume messages, depending on what you want to do. And the reason I'm saying this is because this goes along with what I said before, which is that we've been building Zaqar for the cloud and with the whole multi-tenancy and OpenStack in mind in order to make it a good messaging service for it. And another use case is user-facing messaging and notifications. So one of the other, another problem that we have, and we actually discussed about this at the last summit, is that we don't have a good way, a good story when we need to send notifications back to the user. So say something happens in the, say something happens in the cloud and you want to notify the user about what's happened in the cloud. We currently don't have a nice way to do that. And to be completely honest, when we started working on Zaqar, this wasn't actually one of the use cases, but it turned out to be a good use case for Zaqar as well, which we basically found out like a couple of cycles ago when we started looking at the issues that we were having and when we started discussing about what Zaqar is and what it's not. One of the failures of graduating. But definitely, if you want to have a user-facing notifications, you can use Zaqar because it's a multi-tenant, and it's easy to just post a message there that has to be visible by a certain amount of users in a specific tenant or region. So that's one of the use cases. It has notifications built in, and users can just go there to the notifications queue and get messages out of there. But it's not about polling, and polling is bad, and we all know that. So like I said, notifications is also probably second biggest feature or part of the API that we focus a lot on. And one of the things that we want to get to is to have all these forms of notifications developed in tree. And so far we have webhooks, and email is on the works right now. And what I mean here is having different ways to push messages back to users. So we want to notify users when something happens. We want users to just configure and register to some queues and to some messages, to some streams of messages, depending on their needs, and have those messages going somewhere. These are some ideas probably stolen from also SNS, and stolen or borrowed, it's probably a better term, from SNS, and they have support for most of these. And this is something that we also want to have in Zaqar. So have a way to email the user when some messages arrive to the queue with the content of the message, or just call a URL and just post a message there depending on the configuration, or even send an SMS, or just send it to the APM, the mobile APM, and make the message appear in their mobile phone. These are all things that are fairly simple to implement, fairly simple to support once you have the whole engine running under the hood, which is one of the reasons why we decided to have both services in a single service, because you can get the most out of whatever you have under the hood of the storage engine you're using. And you don't have to have two different services communicating with each other, which just makes it way simpler. We know when a message gets seen, we know when a message is being deleted, we know when a message expires, so we know when we want to push the messages to the users based on their configuration. Transport. Real quick, so Zaqar this is probably one of the cool things, and probably also one of the really bad things about Zaqar, and it's the fact that it's very pluggable in both areas. You can have different transports, and a transport is the way you communicate to Zaqar. It might be HTTP or WebSocket, and we'll going to talk about that a little bit more. Or it could also be whatever transport you want, like a raw TCP or even AMQP 1.0 if you prefer. It really depends on what you need. And it also has support for different storage engines. It currently has support for MongoDB and Redis, and there's a patch also adding support for Swift as a storage engine. So if you already have Swift deployed in your cloud, you can just use that. You don't have to deploy MongoDB. You don't have to deploy Redis or whatever. And you will get, with Swift, you will get pretty much the same guarantees that MongoDB is supposed to give you. And so I'm saying, like, this is probably one of the good things about Zaqar, and also probably one of the biggest problem it has, and it's because it's not opinionated in any of those areas, which makes it really difficult to guarantee the things that it wants to guarantee. So one of the transports, and the main transport that we've been working on is HTTP, and it has, we're in version 2 now of the API. The reason why, like, we have a version 1 and we have a version 1.1, and the version 1.1 just have some, like, backwards compatible fixes that came out of discussions, and then version 2 is pretty much the one that clears out the whole story about Zaqar and the fact that it's not a queue service, and it removes some guarantees that it used to have. And it probably makes the whole thing clearer. And again, it's not a perfect API. There's a lot of work to do there. But it's just a WSGI app. It's not a, you don't run Zaqar server in your production environment. You just have a WSGI app that you will use with whatever WSGI container you want to use. We don't want to dictate what WSGI container you should use in your production environment. That being said, it's just HTTP. It uses Falcon framework, and it's pretty RESTful API, honestly. And then we have WebSockets, which is not 100% implemented, honestly. There's part of the API implemented already, but that's something that we're working on. And the reason why we're working on WebSocket is because we want you to be able to post messages from pretty much anywhere. And by anywhere in this case, we mean we're focusing a lot on the browser. We want you to be able to connect to Zaqar from your browser without having to go to the shell and, you know, take Zaqar client and write a lot of code or whatever. We want you to just use a JavaScript bindings and just post messages using your browser without having to even use the HTTP API. And one of the reasons behind WebSocket is because we want to have persistent connections to the server, so you don't have to connect every time you want to send a message. You want to just open a connection, keep it open, and stream messages from and to Zaqar. And again, this is something that we've been working on. There's a lot to do there still, but part of the API has been implemented already, and hopefully it will be ready for the Liberty cycle. So, guarantees. Before we get into guarantees, let me stress it a little bit more. The guarantees depend a lot on how you configure Zaqar and how you deploy it. And it really hurts me every time I say this, but it is true. So keep that in mind. It depends on what storage engine you use. If you're using Redis and you don't have any persistence enabled in Redis, Zaqar has no way to guarantee that your messages are not going to be lost. If Redis goes down, you're likely going to lose all your messages. So it really depends on how you deploy Zaqar. And guess what? The first one is message durability. So Zaqar wants to guarantee that you're never going to lose, ever going to lose your messages. And it tries to do its best at guaranteeing this. For instance, if you run Zaqar on top of MongoDB, and MongoDB, the write concerns in MongoDB are no higher or equal to or the maximum number of your deployed slaves or shards, then it will complain. It will just cry and crash. It won't allow you to run Zaqar on top of a non-durable MongoDB deployment. And unless you explicitly go to the configuration and say, hey, I know what I'm doing, just run and stop crying. And it'll do the same, not just in nodes, but also the write concerns of every request it does to MongoDB. And it'll make sure that messages are written before it replies back saying that everything is OK on the server side. And pretty much the same thing will happen with Swift, although Swift had different guarantees from the storage side, and it's basically built on with durability in mind and make sure that you're never going to lose any record in there. But in the case of Redis, we don't have a good way to provide that. So we have this thing called storage capabilities that you cannot modify, but you can introspect, so you know what storages are running behind Zaqar, and you know what guarantees are provided by your cloud provider or by that Zaqar instance specifically. It has a least once guarantee, and the least once guarantee depends on the durability. If durability is not enabled, then this cannot be guaranteed by the API at all. And yeah, that's pretty much everything I have to say about at least once guarantee. So at least once basically means that your messages, once they hit the service, they're going to deliver, being sent back to one of the consumers at least once before they are deleted. And at least once is because one of your consumers can get the message and then hack it or delete it from the server, and that would be just one delivery. But again, if durability is not something that that specific deployment has, then there's no good way to guarantee this. Once and only once delivery. And again, if you've been around messaging world and you've like read a little bit about once and only once, you know that it's practically impossible to guarantee this. But I still wanted to put it there and say that Zaqar has a thing called claims, which is what you would use to go to the API and say, hey, lock this set of messages for me because I want to be the only one consuming those. And that way you will say, give me 10 messages and make sure no one else is going to work on those, and I'm going to be the only one. The problem with that is, if I'm the consumer and I get those messages and then I crash, there's expiration time on the claim, so the messages will be released at some point, and on some other consumers might go there and just work on them. But once I've gotten those messages, Zaqar has no way to guarantee that that specific message, the first message in that claim, has been worked out or not. So if I fail or crash working on the second message I got from that claim, and I haven't deleted the first one, and then I crash, a second consumer can just go there and get another set of messages with the one I already worked on, and still do the same thing as to do this process it as well. So there's no good way unless there's a better communication between clients and the server to provide a once and only once guarantee. But when you read this in the Zaqar world or related to Zaqar, it just means that you have a way to log messages and make sure that no one is going to work on that while you're alive and while you're ready to work on those messages. So once you hack those messages, once you delete those messages from the server, you're good to go, and you make sure that no one has worked on those. It has horizontal scaling, and again, this something depends. This really depends on how you deployed Zaqar, and the reason it depends on how you deploy Zaqar is because if you haven't deployed your storage engine in a way that it can scale, or if you're a MongoDB hater, you might say that MongoDB doesn't scale infinitely, and it might die at some point. That's quite true, honestly. But it really depends on what you have Zaqar running on top of. And if that thing that Zaqar is running on top of fails and it cannot scale horizontally to the infinity and beyond, then Zaqar cannot do the same. But when you read horizontal scaling in Zaqar, related to Zaqar, we literally mean the API. So Zaqar is mostly the API, and that's what we work on most of the time. We spent a lot of time at the very beginning working on the storage engine, and we've gotten to the point where we have two, and now we're going to have the third storage engine in the code base and that we maintain. And our focus have moved completely to the API and provide a better use case for the cloud and provide a better experience for the users. So when you read horizontal scaling, we mean the webheads and the fact that you can add as many webheads as you need, and as long as you keep your storage engine, which we expect you to know how to deploy and maintain, because you picked one or you're just starting and learning. But anyway, we basically mean you can scale Zaqar horizontally, the webheads, and you can add as many as you need. And it refers to not just the HTTP one, but also the WebSocket one. But again, it really depends. I mean, you still have to scale your storage engine. You cannot just deploy Zaqar and pretend that it's going to do everything for you. And one of the things that we've built to make that simpler is called pools. So in Zaqar, you have this concept of pools where one pool points to a specific deployment of MongoDB, and another pull can point to another deployment of MongoDB. So if you're using MongoDB and and you know that you cannot scale that MongoDB instance beyond what you've scaled it already, you might want to deploy either another one, and this is not exactly the reason why we have pools. It's just another side effect of how you can use them to scale Zaqar. Cool, thank you. And then you will just keep adding pools and adding new storage engines and new storage deployments, that you can sit on top of. But the real reason why we wanted to have pools is because we wanted also to give the opportunity to deploy different storage engines and provide different capabilities. So not all the messages that you post in Zaqar need to be persisted and need to have the same guarantees. So you may want to have different flavors on top of those pools, and say that you have this pool that is not durable at all, and use that pool for messages that are not meant to be persisted, and then you have your pool where everything is persistent and it's never going to be lost. It's been built to provide the maximum latency possible. It seems like a joke, but it's kind of not a joke. And what I mean by this is that it is not trying to compete with RabbitMQ on low latency. It is not trying to compete with other message brokers and messaging systems in latency-wise. It does try to have the lowest latency possible, and that means making the API as fast as possible and making sure the storage engine is configured in a way that it does not turns out to be a penalty for the whole service. But the main goal, again, is not to provide the service with the lowest latency possible, but to provide a service that you can post messages to and that you can make your cloud rely on. FIFO. It used to provide FIFO built-in, and this caused a lot of confusions and reasonable confusions, honestly. And it now doesn't provide FIFO anymore as a built-in guarantee and always present guarantee. It's an optional thing. So if you want to have a FIFO, first and foremost, your storage engine has to provide a FIFO. Like if you're using a storage engine that is not capable of guarantee a FIFO like Redis, then the storage you won't be able to create an FIFO bucket, so to speak. But again, the default is not having a FIFO. If you really need, I don't want to say queue. I normally call them topic because that's how I reason about the messages where the messages are stored in Zaqar. But they used to be queues. They used to be called queues in the past when it was Marconi. So if you really need a FIFO, you can just enable and say like, you know what, these messages here should go to this topic called my order topic, and it has to be a FIFO. Problems. We have several problems. Probably the first problem we have is that we don't have enough people working on it. There's like probably I can count it with my hands, honestly, the amount of people that are working on the service. And then like moving Zaqar forward and making it like completely ready for the cloud and consumable by other services hasn't been easy, but I think we're getting there. Some of the services are already adopting Zaqar during the Liberty cycle, which is really cool. Other problems, it is non-opinionated in some places where it should be opinionated, which causes a lot of confusion. It causes different configurations, and like I used to explain Zaqar as a Lego brick because you could basically build it as you wished, but that turned out to be a real problem for us, and also to explain what we wanted to provide and to provide a good service and a good API. So that's been changing, and we've been focusing more on the API. We've been focusing more on making it a good messaging service and removing all the confusion around whether it is a queue service or not. And again, it is not a queue service. This is the node demo break because I don't have any demo right now because I don't believe in demos. So I'll give you like 5 seconds to imagine Zaqar running and me doing demos that work. And if you don't want to imagine anything, you can just look at the spider pig walking on the roof of Homer's house. And that's pretty much it. Questions? There's one. Hey, there's one. Oh, here. As long as you don't ask anything, I'm good.
So I can I can understand Neutron having lots of plugins because various people have an invested set of networking hardware that they want to support, and I can understand storage, same sort of deal, and less so in Nova. But I guess people want to use particular proprietary hypervisors, and other people obviously don't want to. In your case, the plugins seem to be choosing between different free software projects. Why support more than one, particularly if it means different semantics exposed to the user?
That is actually a very good question. So there's a history behind that. Probably the first reason why we went down that road is because OpenStack, well, when we started working on it, there wasn't any big tent, and things were a lot different in OpenStack. But I'm not gonna, so one of the reasons is because OpenStack used to be, or is still, a non-opinionated project, right? So we don't want to dictate what you should use or you shouldn't use. And it's also if you look at Nova, ignore the hypervisor side. If you look at the database side, everyone is using MySQL, but in the reality, the project's actually using SQL Alchemy, which would probably allow you to also use PostgreSQL.
You can use Postgres or DB2.
Yes,
right.
but that's not exposed to the user, so that's an internal deployment choice. In your case, from what I gather from your talk,
right? No, it's an internal deployment choice.
Yeah, it doesn't change behavior.
But you have different. In your case, the behavior, some of the subtleties around queuing
Fair
matter.
enough.
And so you have to query capabilities, so suddenly you've actually got 3 different Zaqars depending on what deployment.
So the second reason is that we also wanted to, at some point we also thought about sitting on top of existing messaging technologies because we didn't want to reinvent the whole wheel, and we ended up reinventing it a lot. So we wanted to sit on top of existing messaging technologies like RabbitMQ and other brokers and just make it easier for you to consume those brokers from a user perspective. At some point we ended up, when we started working on that, we figured out that our API was different enough from whatever the service provided, in this case RabbitMQ, which is the one we tried to, and it was different enough to not making it possible to actually sit on top of that. So to answer your question, we could make an opinionated choice now and say, you know what, we're not going to support any other storage engine and just provide one thing. And that's something that's been running in my mind for a couple of cycles already. And probably the reason I haven't had the guts to just go out there and propose it is because I know we have bigger problems right now from the API perspective and the adoption perspective, that just going there and saying, you know what, we decided that you cannot choose your own database and we're going to spend this whole cycle removing that thing, we penalize the project from an adoption perspective. So for instance, in the Liberty cycle, we said no to basically everything but adoption. So we went to different services and we said, so what is it that you need that we don't have to make it possible for you to consume Zaqar? And that's what we've been focusing on right now. I think that's something that might happen in the future, but again, it has to just be, it has to be proposed and we have to kind of discuss. But it's, I agree with you. That's been that's been more a problem for us than an actual
and that isn't
good
just
thing.
Zaqar's thing. It's, you see that in other OpenStack projects too.
Right.
I mean, you're choosing between different free software projects, really. Just,
Yeah.
just
I mean, it would make designing the API way simpler, honestly.
So do it.
Hmm?
So do it.
Yeah. Well, again, in the Liberty cycle, we've been focusing on adoption.
Yeah.
We need more development.
Exactly.
Oh, if you're here on Monday, we can help you type the delete commands. That
Sure.
won't take too long.